The story of the Age of Invertebrates begins not with thunder, nor with fire, but with a quiet unfolding, a soft exhale of Earth's oceans as they welcome a new chapter of life. To step into this time is to step back more than 500 million years, into a world that is both familiar and profoundly strange, where the seas were the only stage upon which life performed its delicate play. Imagine standing on the shore of that ancient Earth. Before you stretch a coastline untouched by any tree or blade of grass. The land is bare, sculpted by wind and rain, silent except for the distant hiss of waves upon stone. And yet, as your gaze shifts out to the waters, you sense something stirring. Beneath the shimmering surface, a story is being written, one of shells and corals, of trilobites and drifting stars of plankton, of the first great flowering of animals that would shape the destiny of all life to come. The Cambrian explosion had already lit the spark, filling the seas with a sudden burst of diversity, but what followed was no less wondrous. The Paleozoic dawned with a gentler rhythm, as if life, having discovered its voice, began to sing in harmony. It was here, in these ancient oceans, that invertebrates, creatures without backbones, but with astonishing variety, became the rulers of the sea. The oceans of that time were vast and rich with possibility. Picture yourself floating on their surface, the air thin but crisp, the sunlight falling in warm golden beams. The atmosphere is not yet like ours, it is younger, still gathering its breath of oxygen, and the light that reaches the water feels slightly dimmer, softer, as though wrapped in a veil. When it touches the waves, the light scatters into countless ripples, each one shimmering with promise. Beneath that glassy ceiling lies a world in motion. The shallow seas are filled with life, each creature finding its place, its role, its purpose. Trilobites crawl across the sandy floor in endless variety, some as small as your fingertip, others stretching as long as your arm. Their compound eyes, sparkling like tiny gems, take in the light and shadows, the movement of currents, the approach of predators. Each step they take leaves faint imprints in the sand, delicate trails that map out their lives. Brachiopods with their symmetrical shells lie anchored in clusters, quietly opening and closing to filter water for nourishment. To look upon them is to see patience itself, creatures content to remain still, to live by the gentle rhythm of tides and waves. Around them, corals begin their silent work, building tiny limestone homes that over time will grow into reefs, vast underwater cities that shelter and protect countless lives. Above, cephalopods glide like quiet guardians. With their long, chambered shells and trailing tentacles, they are the undisputed hunters of this world. Yet their movement is not hurried. They drift with an elegance that feels almost meditative, as though they know the oceans belong to them. Their dark eyes gleam with intelligence, watching, always watching, as the drama of early life unfolds beneath their shadow. Drifting through the sunlit waters are plankton, countless and unassuming, the invisible architects of the food web. They are so small you might miss them, yet without them, none of the larger creatures could endure. They rise and fall with the daily rhythm of light, a living snowfall that feeds the hungry mouths of filter feeders below. In their endless drifting, they form the heartbeat of the ocean, steady and eternal. The ocean itself seems alive. Currents sweep through the shallows and into the depths, carrying warmth, oxygen, and nutrients across continents. They connect ecosystems far apart, just as the wind carries seeds across fields in later ages. Here, in these primordial waters, the currents whisper of unity, of connection, of life, woven into a fabric too vast to see in one glance. And all around, in the quiet between movements, is a silence that is not empty but full. It is the silence of possibility, of a world unhurried by time, a silence that invites you to listen closely, to notice the small miracles happening in every corner of the sea. The trilobites' slow crawl, the brachiopods' quiet sip, the corals' patient construction. Together they weave a story that will last hundreds of millions of years. This is the age of invertebrates, a time when creatures without bones define the shape of the oceans, when ecosystems first grew complex, when survival became not just a matter of existence, but of creativity. It is the age where life learned how to build, how to adapt, how to endure. So let us journey together into this age. Let us drift with the plankton, walk beside trilobites, and linger in the coral gardens. Let us listen to the whisper of the currents, the quiet hum of an ocean alive with secrets. For here, in the age of invertebrates, The foundations of all future life were laid, softly, patiently, beautifully, in seas that promised not just survival, but the unfolding of a grand and timeless story. The oceans of 500 million years ago stretched vast and unbroken, covering most of Earth's surface in rolling blue mystery. These waters were different from those you know today, though in their rhythm, in their constant swaying, you would still recognize something timeless. Imagine drifting upon them, your body cradled by waves that had yet to know the presence of fish or whales, yet to echo with birdsong overhead. The world was quiet in its own way, but it was also alive with subtle whispers, with a promise that the sea was ready to keep. The sunlight of those days fell softer upon the waters, its rays thinner, filtered through an atmosphere not yet rich in oxygen. When it pierced the surface, the light spread into beams, descending into a realm of blues and greens that seemed endless. In shallow waters near ancient coastlines, the brightness created a shimmering canopy, a moving ceiling of fire and gold that rippled endlessly above. Beneath it, the world was calm, a sanctuary in which life could experiment and unfold. The seabed itself was a place of astonishing quiet beauty. Sands, fine and silken, stretched like blankets over gentle slopes. Rocks, ancient and weathered, stood as silent guardians, coated in thin films of algae and microbes, the quiet groundwork for ecosystems still to come. Here and there, burrows marked the presence of hidden lives, tiny worms and early arthropods moving just beneath the surface, shaping the sands with their daily routines. If you were to reach down and sift the grains through your fingers, you would find them alive with countless specks of activity, each one a small story in a greater tale. Currents drifted lazily through these seas, carrying warmth, oxygen, and nutrients. They were the lifeblood of this world, invisible but essential, weaving together distant shores and bringing gentle change to every creature they touched. Imagine lying on a beach, feeling the slow pulse of the tide upon your feet. So too did these ancient currents breathe through the oceans, steady, eternal, coaxing life to thrive. And life was indeed thriving. It was still fragile, still new, but it filled the water with delicate abundance. Plankton shimmered like living dust motes in the sunlight, catching the beams and glowing faintly as they drifted. Their numbers were beyond comprehension, forming invisible clouds that turned the water into a living soup. Each one, so small as to be nearly invisible, carried with it the future of food chains, the foundations of all things to come. As you glide deeper, you would find the beginnings of communities taking shape. Brachiopods, small and shelled, anchored themselves to the seafloor, their valves gently opening and closing, tasting the water with each soft movement. They were patient, never hurrying, filtering the world one sip at a time. Nearby, trilobites scuttled across the sand, their many legs moving in graceful unison, their segmented bodies armored yet flexible. Some were the size of a fingernail, others stretched nearly a foot long, all part of the same great family. They left faint trails behind them, like cursive letters written in sand that waves would never erase. Above them all, the lords of the sea drifted in stately silence. Straight-shelled cephalopods, their long chambers filled with gas and water, glided with jet-like pulses, their tentacles reaching out to test the world around them. They were predators, yet there was no cruelty in their hunt, only the quiet necessity of survival, written into the very fabric of existence. To watch them was to see elegance itself, slow, deliberate, an eternal dance of life and need. And in the stillness between these movements, in the quiet times when no shell clicked and no current stirred, the oceans hummed with a silence that was never truly empty. The waters themselves seemed to whisper with potential, as though Earth herself were holding her breath, waiting to see what her seas might yet bring forth. It was in this silence that the promise of the Age of Invertebrates was kept, a promise that life, once awakened, would not retreat, but would grow, diversify, and fill every corner of this ancient world. The oceans of promise were not loud or dramatic. They did not erupt with spectacle, but unfolded with patience, as though life knew it had all the time in the world. And indeed it did. For in these waters, in the gentle embrace of the early Paleozoic seas, the stage was set for the greatest unfolding Earth had yet known, the Age of Invertebrates, the quiet architects of the living world. In the early seas of the Paleozoic, one creature above all became the emblem of an age, the trilobite. Their reign was not brief or passing, but long and patient, stretching for nearly 300 million years. To speak of the age of invertebrates without honoring them would be like telling the story of a forest without mentioning its trees. They were everywhere, in shallow waters and deep basins, crawling across the seabed like living constellations scattered beneath the waves. Imagine first their form. A trilobite's body was divided into 3 long ridges, a central lobe, flanked by 2 curved side lobes. This design, simple and yet intricate, gave them their name, 3-lobed. Their shells were patterned with delicate ridges, each line like the rings of a tree, marking growth, marking time. Some were tiny, scarcely larger than a grain of rice, while others stretched the length of your forearm. Each size, each shape, told its own story of adaptation to a different corner of the sea. Now picture them alive, moving as a group across the sandy seafloor. Their many legs, hidden beneath their protective armor, moved in gentle rhythm, a wave of motion carrying them forward. They scuttled, not unlike crabs or beetles, their antennae twitching softly as they sensed their surroundings. To watch them was to see a silent march of armored pilgrims, explorers in a land of currents and sand. Their eyes were perhaps their most remarkable feature. Unlike the simple eyes of many early creatures, trilobite eyes were made of calcite crystals, true lenses that refracted light into patterns and clarity. Imagine peering through a jewel and seeing the world magnified, illuminated. This was their gift. With such vision, they could see predators approach or notice the flicker of plankton drifting by. Their gaze connected them deeply to their world, as if each eye carried not just sight, but memory. The trilobites lived varied lives. Some grazed quietly, scraping algae and detritus from rocks and sands. Others burrowed, hiding from predators or hunting smaller prey in the sediments. Some swam, their bodies streamlined for short bursts through the water. And some evolved into spiny forms, their armor bristling with defenses that glittered like thorns under the shifting light. Every niche in the sea seemed to find its trilobite, a testament to their adaptability, their quiet ingenuity. Close your eyes and imagine lying on the seabed, still and watchful, as trilobites move all around you. Their shells clink softly as they bump against stones, their legs stirring faint clouds of sand that drift and settle again like dust in a sunbeam. You might hear nothing but the faint rush of the current, the muted hum of an ocean alive, but in their movements, you would sense a pulse, steady, communal, enduring. And they were communal. Fossil beds tell us that trilobites sometimes gathered in groups, even forming lines across the seabed as though marching together. Some may have migrated in herds, moving with the tides or the seasons. Others gathered to molt, shedding their old shells in great numbers, leaving behind fields of carapaces like a silent testament to their growth. Picture it, a shallow bay filled with hundreds of trilobites, each one slowly wriggling free from its shell, then scuttling away renewed. The seabed would glitter with discarded armor, pale and empty, as though an army had left behind its suits of mail. Yet for all their armor and sight, trilobites lived with constant awareness of the dangers around them. Cephalopods drifted above, watchful hunters, their tentacles ready to snatch the unwary. Other invertebrates competed for food and space. The ocean, though beautiful, was not always forgiving, but trilobites endured. They adapted, split into thousands of species, spread across nearly every oceanic environment. And in their endurance, they became the quiet rulers of their world. Not rulers in the sense of dominance or conquest, but in the way a meadow of flowers rules a landscape, by filling it with color, by being everywhere, by defining the very character of the place. The Paleozoic seas were trilobite seas. To walk upon their sands, to drift through their waters, was to see trilobites at every turn, their shells glinting like stars in the shifting light. Their story is not only one of survival, but of legacy. Long after their reign ended, their fossils remain, pressed into stone like delicate imprints of memory. Children today can pick them up from riverbeds and mountainsides, hold them in their palms, and marvel at the strange beauty of life long gone. In that way, trilobites still live, still whisper their story across millions of years. The reign of trilobites was not a reign of violence or power, but of presence, a steady, enduring presence that shaped ecosystems, fed predators, and gave Earth one of its most iconic groups of creatures. They were the heartbeat of the age of invertebrates, steady and sure. And so, when we think of this age, we think first of them, trilobites scuttling beneath the waves, their eyes bright, their shells gleaming, their trails etching soft paths across the sand, paths that remind us even now that life's first great dominion was carried not by giants, but by these humble, armored wanderers of the sea. In the quiet rhythm of the Paleozoic seas, another kind of life found its place, a life less mobile, less restless, but no less important. These were the brachiopods, the shelled treasures of ancient oceans, small and humble at first glance, yet central to the symphony of this age. Imagine kneeling down upon the seabed, the sand cool beneath your hands, and brushing aside a faint cloud of drifting silt. Beneath your fingertips you would find them, shells, dozens of them, anchored to stones, nestled together in clusters, or resting in shallow depressions. Some no larger than a fingernail, others broader and heavier, but each one perfectly shaped, each one a polished ornament of life's unfolding story. At first glance, a brachiopod might remind you of a clam. Both carry two shells or valves closing tightly around the soft body within, yet the symmetry of the brachiopod is different, more balanced from top to bottom, with shells that fit together like the two halves of a gentle clasp. Their form is elegant, deliberate, as though carved by patient hands, and in that quiet design, they endured for hundreds of millions of years. The life of a brachiopod was simple, but not without beauty. Anchored by a stalk called a pedicle, many attached themselves to stones or to the surfaces of reefs. Others nestled freely into the sand, their shells resting lightly against the seabed. When the water flowed around them, their valves would part, opening just enough to reveal delicate, feathery arms within. These arms, called lophophores, waved softly in the currents, straining plankton and tiny particles from the water. It was a life of patience, of gentle filtering, of quiet sustenance taken in slow, steady rhythm. Now picture a reef covered in them, hundreds together, their shells gleaming faintly in the shifting light. As currents passed, a soft ripple of movement spread across the cluster, each shell opening just slightly, each lophophore unfurling like the petals of an unseen flower. They did not compete, they did not chase, they did not fight, they simply existed together as living ornaments adorning the reef. There was something deeply cozy in their presence. While trilobites scuttled restlessly across the sands and cephalopods drifted above like watchful hunters, brachiopods remained steady, their lives measured not in moments of haste, but in ages of patience. A single shell could persist for decades, weathering currents and storms, its owner never leaving its chosen place. They were, in many ways, the anchors of their ecosystems, creatures who did not wander, but held firm, offering stability and balance in a world always shifting. If you were to linger long enough beside them, you might begin to notice the subtle artistry of their shells. Some bore ridges that fanned outward like rays of the sun. Others carried fine lines, delicate as threads of silk, recording each season of growth. There were smooth shells, glossy and plain, and there were ornate ones, carved with spirals and folds that caught the light in intricate patterns. Each one was both home and history, both shelter and story. The oceans of the Paleozoic were rich with their presence. Fossil records tell us that brachiopods spread far and wide, colonizing shallow waters across the globe. They became one of the most abundant and enduring forms of life, so common that entire rock layers today are built from their remains. To walk along a limestone cliff in our own time, to see it flecked with faint shell imprints, is to touch the legacy of these patient creatures, their lives pressed into stone across 500 million years. Yet their story is not one of solitude. Though still and anchored, they played a role in the wider symphony of the seas. They fed countless small predators, their shells cracked open by opportunistic hunters. Their clustered shells created habitats for worms, trilobites, and countless other creatures, forming tiny refuges within the larger reef. In their stillness, they gave shelter. In their patience, they gave balance. Close your eyes again and imagine a shallow bay, the water warm and gentle, sunlight falling in golden ribbons upon the sand. Around you, trilobites wander and cephalopods glide, but it is the brachiopods that set the tone, a quiet, steady chorus of shells opening and closing, in rhythm with the current. They do not move far, yet in their constancy, they remind us of something profound, that life does not always need to rush or wander to be meaningful. Sometimes it is enough simply to endure, to hold one's place, to let the currents pass and still remain. These shelled treasures, so humble in their daily lives, helped weave the tapestry of the Age of Invertebrates. They were not predators, not explorers, not giants of the sea, and yet they were indispensable ornaments, anchors, quiet keepers of stability in the flourishing ocean world. The seas of this age shimmered with their presence, and in their shells we glimpsed the beauty of patience, the art of simply being, and in being, shaping the story of life itself. The oceans of the early Paleozoic were more than wide stretches of sand and scattered shells. In certain places, where the water was shallow and the sunlight fell with warmth, something new began to grow, something that would change the very shape of life beneath the waves. Here, corals took root, weaving their skeletons together into the first true reefs. What began as small, scattered colonies became, over time, gardens of stone and living color, places where the ocean seemed to pause and breathe more deeply. Imagine approaching one of these reefs, drifting slowly through the sunlit shallows. From a distance, it looks almost like a ridge of rock, uneven and craggy, but as you draw nearer, the reef reveals itself for what it is: alive. Tiny polyps, no larger than the tip of a finger, extend their delicate tentacles into the water, swaying in unison with the currents. Each one is a single life, but together they form a colony, a community bound in patience and persistence. Their skeletons, secreted over years and decades, rise into shapes that catch the light in wondrous ways. Some branches like trees, their limbs spreading wide to offer shelter and shade. Others mound upward into rounded hills, smooth and steady. Still others form flat platforms, shelves upon which countless other creatures may rest. These structures grow slowly, almost imperceptibly, but given enough time, they transform entire coastlines. To linger here is to enter an underwater city. The coral provides walls and corridors, alcoves and hidden chambers. Trilobites scuttle along its surfaces, grazing on algae that grows in thin films across the skeleton. Brachiopods anchor themselves in sheltered cracks, their shells opening and closing in the gentle tide. Worms and small crustaceans slip into tiny holes, their bodies vanishing into the labyrinth of coral stone. Above it all, nautiloid cephalopods drift slowly, their long shells casting shadows that pass over the reef like drifting clouds. And yet the corals themselves are quiet, unhurried, endlessly patient. They do not move, they do not chase, they do not flee. Instead, they simply grow. Their tentacles catch passing plankton, their skeletons rise millimeter by millimeter, and in that constant state, they create havens. The reef is not just a structure, it is a sanctuary, a place where life gathers, where interactions multiply, where ecosystems flourish. The colors of these early reefs, though not the dazzling neon of modern corals, were no less beautiful. In the filtered light of shallow seas, their forms glowed with soft hues of cream and pale gold, touched here and there with faint blues or greens. The water itself was alive with light beams scattering into shifting mosaics upon the coral surfaces. It was as though the ocean had painted its own cathedral, each stone a note, each current a hymn. Stay long enough and you would notice the rhythm of this place. The slow, steady beat of water moving through the reef. The quiet pulse of polyps feeding, opening, closing, opening, closing. The tiny dances of trilobites moving across coral ridges, leaving trails that look almost like calligraphy written into sand. The reef is not silent, but its music is hushed, subtle, a symphony that requires you to listen with patience. Storms sometimes swept across these reefs, waves crashing with force, churning the waters into chaos. Yet even then, the coral endured. Broken pieces tumbled to the seafloor, but from those fragments new colonies grew, each one a seed of persistence. In time, storms became part of the rhythm, shaping, but never erasing the gardens of stone. What is perhaps most remarkable is the way these corals shape the world not just for themselves, but for countless others. By building reefs, they created new spaces where life could thrive, spaces that did not exist before. They offered homes to the small and shelter from the large. They created feeding grounds, nursery chambers, and resting places. They were the quiet architects of abundance, and in their presence, the seas grew richer, more complex, more alive. Even in our own time, we know this truth: reefs are among the most diverse habitats on Earth. But here, in the Paleozoic, that story was just beginning. These first coral gardens were smaller, simpler, but they carried within them the seed of all that would follow. Every reef since then, from the warm Caribbean shallows to the Great Barrier Reef, traces its lineage back to these ancient gardens of patience. So as you drift away from the reef, carried gently by the current, take one last look at the living city behind you. Notice how it stands not in dominance, but in quiet service, a home for others, a sanctuary of stillness, a reminder that the most profound transformations are often the slowest. The coral gardens of the Age of Invertebrates were not loud, were not swift, but they were enduring, and in that endurance, they shaped the path of life itself. Among the quiet gardens of coral and the bustling fields of trilobites, there drifted a presence unlike any other. Tall, straight shells glinted faintly in the dim blue waters, rising like ivory towers among the shallows. Beneath them, tentacles waved gently, curling and unfurling with a grace both strange and mesmerizing. These were the cephalopods, the first great lords of the Paleozoic seas. Imagine yourself standing on the seafloor, still and small beside one of these beings. The chambered shell stretches upward as long as your body, pale and polished, its smooth surface catching the rays of sunlight that filter down through the water. Within that shell lies a living engineer, carefully balancing gases and fluids to control its buoyancy, rising and falling in the water column as though it were weightless. And from the open end of its shell, a crown of tentacles spreads outward, alive with searching, feeling, tasting. Cephalopods of this age were the first hunters of elegance. While trilobites crawled patiently across the sand and brachiopods waited quietly in their shells, the cephalopods moved with deliberate intent. They drifted forward, then with a sudden jet of water from their siphons, surged ahead in swift pursuit. Their tentacles, supple and strong, wrapped around prey, trilobites, small crustaceans, even other mollusks, and drew them in with a quiet efficiency. There was no frenzy, no chaos, only precision. To watch a cephalopod hunt was to witness the ocean's first ballet of predation. And yet, for all their strength, there was something undeniably graceful about them. Their long shells floated upright in the water, like towers gliding silently through the current. They moved slowly most of the time, conserving energy, their tentacles spread like delicate roots, feeling their way through the water. Only when the moment called for it did they release their hidden power, darting forward in a flash of sudden speed. This contrast, patience and swiftness, calm drifting and sudden strike, gave them a majesty unmatched in their world. The coral gardens and shallow bays were their hunting grounds, but they did not confine themselves there. Cephalopods ranged far and wide, into deeper waters, into the open ocean, into places where few other creatures dared to wander. Their mastery of buoyancy gave them freedom. They could rise with the morning sun, following plankton drifting in the light, then sink with the dusk into darker realms where shadows ruled. In this way, they became explorers as well as predators, moving across habitats with ease, claiming the ocean in its breadth and depth. Close your eyes and imagine drifting beside one. Its tentacles ripple softly, brushing past you with the gentlest touch. Its shell towers upward, casting a faint shadow. Its dark eyes, so different from the faceted gaze of trilobites, turn toward you, and for a moment you feel seen. Cephalopods were not merely hunters of instinct. They carried with them a kind of intelligence, an awareness that seemed deeper, more deliberate. Even in these early forms, one senses the spark of thought that would, in distant ages, give rise to octopuses and squids, those masters of cunning and adaptation. But here in the Paleozoic, they are pioneers. Their shells, sometimes straight, sometimes gently curved, stand as symbols of innovation. Within, their bodies are marvels of design, regulating gas and liquid with precision, dividing their shells into chambers like the rooms of a cathedral. Each chamber is a step in their journey, each one abandoned as they grow, sealed off but never forgotten. To peer into the fossil of a cephalopod shell is to glimpse the staircase of its life, each rung carved in stone. Their presence transformed the balance of the seas. Where once invertebrates had grazed and filtered in relative safety, now a new kind of danger drifted among them, silent, deliberate, and always watching. Yet even this was part of the ocean's unfolding harmony. Predators refine the prey, prey shape the predator, and in their endless dance, life becomes stronger, richer, more resilient. The cephalopods were not destroyers, but teachers, guiding evolution toward complexity. Still, they were not invulnerable. Storms could dash them against rocks, crushing their shells. Larger predators would one day emerge to challenge their dominance. Yet for this chapter of time, they were unrivaled, the lords of their domain, moving with slow majesty through seas that bent, quietly, to their presence. If you linger with them, you may notice their world through their eyes, not a world of chaos, but of patterns, light drifting down in shifting beams, shadows of trilobites moving along the sand, the trembling ripple of a brachiopod's shell as its valves open and close. To a cephalopod, the ocean was a tapestry, woven of movements and rhythms, each one an opportunity, each one a story. And so, as we pass through the coral gardens and into deeper waters, we follow the cephalopods, these lords of grace and silence. They remind us that power need not be loud, that mastery can be gentle, that elegance itself can be a kind of strength. In their slow drifting and sudden strikes, in their patience and their presence, they carried the dignity of the ocean upon their shells, writing a chapter of life that still echoes in every nautilus, every squid, every octopus that graces the seas today. As the oceans of the Paleozoic continued to blossom with diversity, another form of life began to rise, quiet and unassuming at first, but destined to leave its mark upon the seas. These were the crinoids, the sea lilies, creatures that looked more like flowers than animals, their bodies anchored to the seabed by long stalks, their delicate arms unfurling into the water like petals reaching for light. They were not flowers, of course, but echinoderms, kin to starfish and sea urchins, yet in their grace and stillness, they were the blossoms of the underwater world. Imagine drifting over a reef or sandy shelf where the current flows steadily, carrying with it fine particles of food. Rising from the floor are dozens, then hundreds of crinoids. Their stems sway with the water, tall and slender, sometimes a foot long, sometimes stretching higher still. Atop each stem sits a crown, a living bouquet of feathery arms that spread outward in perfect symmetry. The arms wave slowly, rhythmically, not in haste, but in harmony with the sea itself. Each motion is an invitation to the drifting plankton, each gesture a quiet harvest of the ocean's endless gifts. The scene is almost meadow-like. Where corals built their reefs of stone and brachiopods anchored like shells in clusters, crinoids turned the seafloor into something softer, gentler, a field of living flowers. Their arms, catching light, catching currents, shimmer faintly as they sway. Schools of trilobites scuttle between their stems like small animals weaving through tall grass. Small worms and crustaceans nestle at their bases, finding shelter among their roots. It is a garden, a living one, shaped not by haste, but by patience. The life of a crinoid is simple, but its simplicity is profound. With their arms extended, they filter the water, catching microscopic food with tiny tube feet along their feathery rays. Once captured, the food is carried down grooves toward the mouth at the center of the crown. It is a slow and steady feast, a rhythm of catching, carrying, and consuming, repeated endlessly with the flow of the tide. Crinoids do not chase their meals, they wait, and the ocean provides. Close your eyes and picture yourself lying at the base of this meadow, looking upward. Above you, the crowns of crinoids sway like trees in a soft breeze, their arms spreading and curling in graceful arcs. Shafts of sunlight pierce the water, painting the meadow in gold and silver. Every movement is slow, deliberate, and calming, as though the very world has taken a deep breath and chosen to rest here for a while. The crinoids embody serenity, their stillness reminding us that there is strength not only in speed, but in patience. And yet they were not without beauty in their design. Their arms were lined with delicate pinnules, fine branches upon branches, doubling their surface area and giving them the appearance of lace or feathers. Some crowns spread wide like open hands, others curled inward like fists at rest. Their stalks, segmented and jointed, gave them flexibility, allowing them to lean into the current or straighten tall when the flow was steady. Each one was a small miracle of engineering, designed not to conquer, but to coexist. The crinoids were also builders, though not in the same way as corals. As they lived and died, their skeletons of calcium carbonate fell to the seafloor, breaking into discs and segments that accumulated over time. In places where crinoids flourished, the seabed became paved with these fragments, layers upon layers of their remains forming future limestone beds. Even now, in our own world, if you walk along an ancient cliff or a riverbed, you may see small round fossils, shaped like beads or coins, the broken stalks of Paleozoic crinoids, still whispering of their meadows beneath the sea. Predators, of course, visited these gardens. Cephalopods drifted overhead, tentacles trailing, while smaller scavengers nibbled at the crowns, but the crinoids endured. Their numbers were many, their patience infinite. Even when storms swept across the shallows, tearing stalks from the sand, new colonies sprouted in their place. The meadow always regrew, always swayed again in time with the sea. If you linger in this world, listening to the hushed song of the current, you may come to understand why the crinoids are remembered not only as survivors, but as gardeners. They filtered the waters, they gave shelter, they created beauty simply by being. Their lives did not dominate or destroy, but nurtured and balanced. In their slow, rhythmic swaying, they kept the oceans clean, turned sunlight into sustenance, and reminded the seas that life could be peaceful as well as fierce. The Age of Invertebrates was filled with shells and claws, with armored trilobites and mighty cephalopods. Yet here, among the gardens of crinoids, we find another face of life, one of quiet grace, of meadows swaying forever beneath the waves. They were not hunters, not restless wanderers, but patient keepers of the ocean's calm. And in their presence, the seas of the Paleozoic breathed more deeply, their currents softened, their rhythms steadied, their beauty made whole. The seas of the Paleozoic were not still paintings. They were living canvases, shifting, changing, always in motion. Each creature, whether trilobite, brachiopod, coral, or crinoid, lived not only within the embrace of the ocean, but also under its challenges, currents that shifted, predators that prowled, storms that disturbed the calm. To live here was to adapt, and in the Age of Invertebrates, adaptation became its own art. Imagine for a moment the trilobites once more. At first, their shells were smooth, simple arcs of armor, but as predators grew sharper in their hunting, the trilobites too began to change. Some developed spines that jutted outward, long and menacing, making them difficult to swallow. Others flattened themselves, hugging the seafloor so tightly that even the swiftest hunter might overlook them, mistaking their bodies for stones. Still others learned to curl into balls, tucking legs and antennae safely beneath their shells until they resembled small, armored beads, safe, secure, and nearly unbreakable. This was the ocean's language, each threat answered by a new design, each pressure shaping life into more wondrous forms. It was not a hurried race, but a slow dance, one step answered by another, one gesture countered with grace. Over millions of years, trilobites alone blossomed into tens of thousands of species, each one a variation on a theme, each one a brushstroke in the art of survival. The brachiopods, too, had their quiet answers. While some remained anchored by stalks, others grew heavier shells, thickened against the jaws of predators. Some found safer ground in deeper waters where the light was dim but hunters were fewer. Still others shifted their shell shapes, widening or elongating, to better hold their ground against the pull of currents. No two clusters of brachiopods were quite the same. Each population carried its own adjustments, its own lessons written into the ridges of its shell. Corals adapted by expanding their forms. Where once they built only small colonies, they began to weave larger reefs, fortresses of stone that became refuges for themselves and countless others. In doing so, they transformed their vulnerability into resilience. A single coral polyp was fragile, but together they became strong. In unity, they found endurance, a truth that still defines reefs even in our own age. And then there were the cephalopods. Their very bodies were adaptations, innovations beyond anything the seas had yet known. Their chambered shells allowed them to rise and fall at will, to drift through depths where no trilobite could crawl. Some grew longer shells for stability, others curved theirs gently for greater maneuverability. Their tentacles themselves were a masterpiece of adaptation, both tools and weapons, able to grasp, to sense, to taste, to hold. Each shift in prey behavior, each new strategy of escape, called forth in cephalopods a countermeasure, sharper vision, quicker movements, more cunning minds. Even the crinoids, anchored in their meadows, were not without change. Some grew taller stalks to catch more of the current, while others shortened theirs, hugging closer to the ground when waters grew rough. Their crowns branched into new shapes, wider or narrower, depending on the rhythms of the seas they called home. Slowly, patiently, they too answered the call of adaptation, shaping themselves to the needs of their world. And beneath it all, the plankton, those tiny drifters, invisible to the casual eye, also changed. Some grew spines that kept them floating longer in the sunlight, delaying their descent into the dark. Others formed protective cases, delicate as glass, that shielded them from hungry mouths. Some joined together in chains, colonies of cells linked like beads on a string, stronger together than they had been alone. Even here, in the smallest of lives, the art of adaptation was painted in fine strokes. Close your eyes and imagine this great dance unfolding not over days or years, but across centuries, across millennia. A trilobite line slowly growing spines over generations, a coral colony expanding reef by reef, a cephalopod shell bending more gracefully with each new lineage. To witness adaptation is not to see sudden change, but to feel the ocean's patient brush, painting life anew with every passing age. There is a coziness in this story too, for though adaptation often speaks of struggle, here it is not war but conversation. The ocean whispers and life answers. The predator sharpens and the prey grows sturdier. The current shifts and the anchors find new ways to hold fast. It is a dialogue as old as the sea itself and as gentle as the tides that wash upon every shore. In these ages, adaptation was not about triumph or defeat. It was about persistence, about finding ways to remain, to continue, to belong. Every shell, every spine, every curve of coral told a story of resilience. Together, these stories wove the ocean into a place not of chaos, but of harmony, a living tapestry that balanced the sharp with the soft, the hunter with the hunted, the still with the restless. And so, in the age of invertebrates, life became not only more abundant, but more creative. Each new form was not merely survival, but expression, an artistry shaped by time, patience, and the gentle sculpting hand of the ocean itself. Not all the wonders of the age of invertebrates unfolded in the deep. Some of its most intimate stories, its most delicate moments, were written where the ocean met the land, in the shallows. Here, sunlight reached every corner of the seabed. Here, the tides whispered their steady rhythm against stone. Here, life flourished in quiet abundance, small and humble, yet essential to the unfolding story of Earth. Imagine walking along an ancient shoreline. There are no forests behind you, no grass at your feet, no birds overhead. The land is barren, its rocky surface touched only by wind and rain. But before you, the sea stretches wide, its edges warmed by the sun. Shallow waters lap gently against tide pools and sandy shelves, each one a cradle of activity. Bend closer, and you will see entire worlds written in miniature, each pool alive with secrets. The tidal pools are warm, their waters calm, trapped by rock until the tide returns. Within them, tiny crustaceans scurry, their delicate legs flicking as they dart between pebbles. Worms wriggle just beneath the sand, their movements leaving faint, shifting trails. Small mollusks cling to stone, their shells glistening in the light. And above them, delicate films of algae shimmer green and gold, feeding those who graze upon them. It is a quiet community, fragile yet resilient, a microcosm of the larger sea. Step just beyond the pools, into the shallows proper, and the world expands. Here, trilobites roam in greater numbers, moving in gentle herds across the sandy floor. Some burrow just beneath the surface, their armored backs hidden save for the faint ripple of sand above. Others wander openly, their antennae twitching, their eyes scanning for drifting morsels. They are not alone. Brachiopods anchor themselves in small clusters, their shells opening and closing with the rhythm of the tide. Tiny filter feeders drift by, their translucent bodies catching the sunlight, glowing like sparks of amber in the water. Above it all, the light itself feels alive. Shafts of gold pierce the rippling surface, scattering into wavering patterns across the sand. The water is clear, shallow enough that every movement feels touched by the sun. The ocean here seems softer, friendlier, a place of beginnings rather than endings. In these sunlit shallows, life can experiment, thrive, and multiply, nurtured by the warmth of day and the shelter of stone. The currents, though gentle, are constant. They sweep through, bringing with them nutrients from the deeper sea. Each wave deposits new life into these shallows, drifting plankton, broken fragments of coral, even the occasional cephalopod shell rolling softly across the sand. The shallows are not isolated, but connected, always replenished, always renewed. There is danger here too, though it comes quietly. When the tide retreats, pools may shrink, leaving creatures stranded. The sun warms the water until it grows shallow and hot, testing the endurance of those within. Yet even these challenges shape life. Those that survive pass on their resilience, and over generations, the creatures of the shallows grow stronger, more adaptable, more attuned to their fragile home. Picture yourself lying upon the seabed, the sand cool beneath your hands as you gaze upward. Above, the surface shimmers like glass, every ripple catching the sunlight in diamonds of silver and gold. Around you, small lives move in constant rhythm, trilobites leaving trails, brachiopods opening and closing, algae swaying in the tide. It feels intimate, as though the ocean has opened a small book just for you, each page a quiet revelation. And perhaps most importantly, the shallows are places of connection. They are the threshold between land and sea, between the barren silence of the shore and the abundant mystery of the depths. It is here that life first edges closer to the possibility of land, here that fungi drift upon damp winds, here that the promise of plants whispers from the future. The shallows are not just habitats, they are gateways, where the story of life begins to lean toward what is yet to come. In the great drama of the Age of Invertebrates, the shallows are the soft interludes, the gentle pauses between grandeur. They are the places where life is not loud, but tender, not vast, but intimate. They remind us that even in the smallest pools, even in the quiet corners of the sea, the great story of Earth is written, patient, fragile, and full of promise. The shallow waters of the Paleozoic shimmered with warmth and life, but farther out, beyond the reach of the tides, the ocean grew vast and deep. Here in the open sea, the light faded into twilight, and the currents stretched endlessly in every direction. It was a realm of drifting, a place where creatures surrendered themselves to the rhythm of the water, letting the sea itself carry them through the world. Imagine floating here, far from any shoreline, where the horizon is endless and the water beneath you drops into unknowable darkness. The surface sparkles in the sunlight, but only for a short distance below. As you descend, the light softens, filtering into pale beams that stretch and then dissolve into dim blue. Deeper still, colors vanish one by one, reds fading first, then oranges, until only green and blue remain. Soon you are wrapped in shadows, a place neither dark nor light, but something between, the ocean's eternal twilight. And yet even here life abounds. Drifting with the currents are plankton, billions upon billions, tiny as dust motes and just as countless. They shimmer faintly when the light catches them, rising and falling with the daily rhythm of the sea. At dawn they ascend toward the surface, basking in the sun's glow, and at dusk they sink again, retreating to safety. This vertical migration, the largest daily movement of life on Earth, began here in these ancient seas. It was quiet, invisible from above, yet as grand as any migration across plains or skis. Among the plankton drifted larger, stranger forms. Jellyfish, soft-bodied and translucent, pulsed gently through the water. Their bells expanded and contracted in slow, rhythmic grace, propelling them just enough to guide their course while still surrendering to the currents. Some were small, delicate as glass, their tentacles trailing like fine threads of silk. Others were larger, their bells wide and luminous, glowing faintly as the sunlight passed through their tissues. Together, they filled the water like floating lanterns, a procession of living lights drifting endlessly through the depths. Other drifters, too, joined this silent journey. Tiny arthropods, their bodies segmented and jointed, flicked their appendages to steer, then let the current carry them onward. Larval forms of larger creatures floated here as well, beginning their lives in the open sea before returning to reefs and shallows. Even early cephalopods sometimes wandered into these waters, their shells rising and falling as they explored the dim. Close your eyes and imagine being among them. Around you, the water is hushed, a vast cathedral where the walls are made of endless blue and the ceiling is the shimmering surface high above. The creatures around you do not rush. They drift, they pulse, they rise and fall in harmony with the tide. It feels less like chaos and more like a slow dance, a choreography directed by the ocean itself. Each movement is soft, unhurried, eternal. The depths were not only a place of drifting, but also a place of balance. Here, nutrients sank from the surface, carried by the remains of plankton and the soft rain of organic particles. This marine snow, tiny flakes of life and death, fell gently, endlessly, feeding those who lived below. It was a snowfall that never ceased, a quiet reminder that even in darkness, the gift of life continued to descend, sustaining the unseen. Predators, too, haunted these depths, though they came in silence. Nautiloid cephalopods glided here, their tentacles brushing against the currents as they searched for prey. With their sharp eyes and precise movements, they broke the stillness only when hunger called. Otherwise, they too were drifters, patient watchers in the dim. And through it all, the ocean's voice was constant. The current moved like breath, steady and vast. In the stillness of the depths, you could almost hear it, a deep hum, the resonance of water upon water, the heartbeat of a world that had only just begun to sing. There is a coziness in this drifting world, a quietness that feels like being wrapped in a blanket of blue. Here, there are no crashing waves, no bustling herds of trilobites, no bustling reef cities of coral. There is only the gentle rise and fall of the current, the endless patience of jellyfish and plankton, the hush of twilight waters carrying life like lanterns through the deep. It is a place of rest, of stillness, a reminder that life's story is not always about action or grandeur, but about surrender, about learning to move with the world rather than against it. The creatures of these depths wrote no dramatic chapters, built no reefs, carved no shells into stone, and yet they sustained the ocean. They fed the larger lives, they cycled nutrients, they connected the surface to the deep. In their drifting, they became the threads that tied the sea together, quiet but essential, invisible yet indispensable. And so, in the age of invertebrates, the depths were never empty. They were filled with movement, slow, drifting, patient movement. A lantern procession of life, rising and falling in time with the sun, humming softly in a cathedral of blue. The age of invertebrates was not only about individual lives, trilobites crawling, brachiopods opening and closing, cephalopods drifting with solemn grace. Beneath those quiet motions, something larger was taking shape. For the first time in Earth's history, life was not scattered, not fragile, not fleeting. It was beginning to weave itself into systems, ecosystems, intricate webs where every creature touched another, and together they created something greater than themselves. Imagine looking down upon a shallow sea from above. At first, the view is of countless small lives moving in isolation, trilobites grazing, brachiopods filtering, plankton drifting in sunbeams. But stay longer and you begin to notice the connections. The trilobites feed upon algae and smaller invertebrates. The brachiopods filter the plankton. The cephalopods hunt trilobites and mollusks. The crinoids filter organic particles carried by the current. Each act of eating, of filtering, of grazing is a thread. Slowly, you see that the ocean is not a collection of separate stories, but a tapestry woven with threads of need, of nourishment, of balance. The foundation of these webs was the plankton, countless and unseen. They were the grass of this underwater world, the quiet meadows that fed everyone else. They drifted in the currents, multiplying endlessly, each one a drop of sunlight transformed into living matter. Without them, nothing above could endure. Above that base were the filter feeders, the brachiopods, the crinoids, the corals. They strained the water, plucking the plankton from the currents, their patient lives tied to the drifting harvest. In doing so, they transformed invisible specks into flesh and shell, building bodies that would in turn feed others. Their stillness was not passivity, it was participation in the ocean's great exchange. Then came the grazers, the wanderers of the seabed, trilobites, early mollusks and small arthropods. They scraped algae from rocks, sifted detritus from the sand and burrowed in search of nourishment. They were the quiet janitors of the sea, keeping surfaces clean, stirring sediments, recycling what was left behind. In their constant motion, they created balance, ensuring that nothing lay unused, that every scrap of life's abundance was turned to purpose. And above them moved the predators. The cephalopods glided silently, tentacles outstretched, eyes sharp. They hunted trilobites, small mollusks, and anything else their intelligence and speed could overtake. Their presence brought tension into the ecosystem, yet it was a necessary tension. By preying upon the abundant grazers, they prevented overcrowding, ensuring that no single group consumed more than its share. Even in their hunt, they served the harmony of the seas. Picture, if you will, a reef during the height of this age. Corals rise like living fortresses, their skeletons branching outward. Among them, brachiopods cluster, opening and closing with the tide. Trilobites scuttle across the surfaces, some grazing peacefully, others fleeing the approach of a looming shadow. Above, a cephalopod drifts into view, its long shell glinting, tentacles spreading as it descends toward its prey. Farther out, plankton shimmer in invisible clouds, feeding all who filter the water. And beneath, the crinoids sway, their arms rising like lacework to capture what drifts their way. It is not a collection of creatures, but a chorus, each voice rising and falling in its turn, creating music greater than anyone could sing alone. The beauty of these early ecosystems was not only in their structure, but in their resilience. If one group faltered, another filled its place. If a storm swept through and shattered a coral colony, trilobites and worms arrived to graze upon the debris, recycling it into new forms of life. If plankton blooms grew thin, filter feeders adjusted, waiting patiently for the waters to grow rich again. It was as though the ocean itself was learning balance, discovering how to weave harmony into diversity. And yet these systems were fragile too. A sudden shift in climate, a drop in oxygen, a change in currents, all could ripple through the web, testing its strength. But the miracle was not that fragility existed. The miracle was that, again and again, life endured. It bent, it adapted, it reshaped itself. The threads never broke entirely. They rewove themselves with patience and time. There is something deeply cozy in this story. To imagine these ecosystems is to imagine not chaos or violence, but community. Countless creatures, each small, each fragile, and yet together forming a whole that was steady, enduring, and strong. The Trilobites' scuttle mattered because it stirred the sand for others. The Brachiopods' filtering mattered because it turned plankton into nourishment for predators above. Even the Cephalopods' hunt mattered, for it kept balance in the growing chorus of life. Nothing was wasted, nothing was separate, everything belonged. When we look upon the limestone cliffs of our own time, their layers built from corals and shells and crinoid stalks, we are looking at the memory of those ecosystems. They are pressed into the stone, the imprints of balance itself, frozen yet eternal. Each fossil is not just the story of a single creature, but a note in the song of an entire world. And so, in the Age of Invertebrates, ecosystems were born, the first true communities of life on Earth. They were the ocean's great experiment, proving that survival is not only about individuals, but about relationships, not only about strength, but about harmony. In their weaving, the oceans became more than alive. They became connected, a living web stretched across every current, every reef, every tide. After the Cambrian explosion had set the stage, and after the first waves of trilobites, brachiopods, crinoids, and corals had taken root, Earth turned the page to a new chapter, the Ordovician period. If the Cambrian was the spark, the Ordovician was the fire's glow, spreading wider, brighter, and more abundant than before. It was a time when the Age of Invertebrates reached its true height, when the oceans became crowded not with chaos, but with a flourishing of life so vast it felt like a celebration whispered through every current. Imagine the seas now, nearly 485 million years ago. They are not barren stretches or lonely shallows. They are filled, teeming, alive with diversity. Everywhere you look, there are shells and spines, reefs and meadows, drifters and hunters. It is as though the ocean, once hesitant, now sang with full voice, each creature adding its own verse to the song. The trilobites, already numerous, grew into astonishing varieties. Some remained the small scuttlers of the seabed, grazing peacefully among corals. Others developed elaborate spines, curling horns, or delicate ornamentation across their shells, as if the ocean had become an artist experimenting with form. Some even grew streamlined bodies, better suited for short bursts of swimming. The trilobites no longer belonged only to the sand. They had spread into every corner of the ocean, as diverse and adaptable as the age itself. Brachiopods, too, flourished. Vast beds of their shells covered the seafloor, opening and closing in unison, filtering the waters with patient rhythm. They became the carpets of the Ordovician seas, layers of living shells upon which other creatures walked, grazed, or hid. Their abundance was so great that entire rock layers, still visible today, were built from their remains. To swim above an Ordovician seafloor was to see a mosaic of shells stretching in every direction, each one a small but vital participant in the ocean's feast. The corals grew bolder too. Their colonies expanded into true reef systems, complex and bustling, alive with hidden corridors and protective alcoves. These reefs were not silent stone, they were neighborhoods humming with activity. Trilobites sought shelter in their shadows. Small mollusks grazed upon their surfaces. Worms burrowed into their foundations. And all around, the coral polyps fed quietly, their tentacles swaying with the tides. In their patient building, the corals created not just habitats, but cities, the earliest great architecture of life. But perhaps the most striking presence of this flourishing age was the cephalopods. With their long, chambered shells and keen eyes, they ruled the open waters. Some grew larger than ever before, their shells stretching meters in length, towering above trilobites and brachiopods alike. They drifted with quiet majesty, tentacles trailing, their movements both graceful and commanding. In these hunters, the Ordovician seas found their first giants, and with them came a sense of awe. Life was no longer small, no longer fragile. It was vast, it was powerful, it was daring. The crinoids multiplied as well, their meadows expanding across shallow shelves. Picture fields of them swaying in the current, their crowns open like lacework flowers, catching particles drifting by. The sight of a crinoid meadow stretching as far as the eye could see must have been breathtaking, a living garden beneath the sea, each stalk a blade of grass, each crown a bloom of patience. Between their stems, trilobites and small arthropods wandered like deer through tall grasses, the meadow offering both food and shelter. And beyond the meadows, the drifting plankton continued their endless cycles, rising by day and falling by night, painting the water column with their invisible abundance. They were the pulse of the ocean, feeding everything from the smallest brachiopod to the mightiest cephalopod. Without them, the Ordovician seas would have fallen silent. With them, the seas became full, rich, and endlessly sustaining. Close your eyes and imagine this world as a whole. The reefs rise like underwater fortresses. The meadows sway like fields in a summer breeze. The open waters shimmer with drifting life. Cephalopods patrol like solemn lords, their shells gleaming in the filtered sunlight. Trilobites scuttle in endless variety, their shells glinting, their eyes bright. It is not a sparse or lonely sea, it is crowded, bustling, alive. It is a tapestry of color and motion, woven together with threads of harmony. The Ordovician flourish was not only about abundance, but about complexity. Food webs grew stronger, more interwoven. Each creature had its place, and each depended upon the others in subtle ways. The trilobites grazing fed the scavenger. The brachiopods filtering cleared the water for corals. The cephalopods hunting balanced the abundance of prey. Nothing existed alone. Everything was part of a web so intricate that even storms, predators, or extinctions could not unravel it completely. And in this richness, the oceans became something new. They became not just habitats, but communities, not just places of survival, but places of thriving. The seas of the Ordovician were Earth's first grand ecosystems, resilient, abundant, and filled with creativity. There is something deeply cozy in imagining these flourishing waters. To float among them is to feel surrounded by life in every direction, above, below, beside you. It is like wandering through a festival where every creature has arrived to play its part, to sing its song, to share its light. The ocean, once quiet, now pulsed with a gentle but constant celebration, a reminder that life's deepest instinct is not only to endure, but to bloom. The Ordovician seas were not only full, they were restless. Life, once confined to narrow ranges, began to spread outward, to test new waters, to wander farther than ever before. Invertebrates, small and patient though they seemed, became travelers. Their migrations were not hurried, not dramatic like the flocks of birds or herds of mammals that would one day roam the earth, but they were steady, persistent, and far-reaching. With each step, or scuttle, or drift, or anchoring, life spread, knitting the oceans together into a connected, living whole. Imagine the shallow shelves along an ancient coastline. Trilobites, once clustered in familiar places, begin to explore farther afield. Some scuttle into deeper waters, finding new homes along slopes where light is dimmer but predators fewer. Others edge into new shallows, crossing sandy bars into lagoons rich with food. Their fossils, found in every corner of the world today, tell us just how far they roamed, from tropical seas near the equator to colder waters at the poles. Trilobites became citizens of the entire ocean, their migrations painting the seafloor with trails of presence. Brachiopods too spread far and wide. Where the currents carried their larvae, new beds of shells appeared. On one coast, clusters of lamp shells anchored to rocky ridges, their valves opening and closing in rhythm with the tide. On another, they formed carpets across sandy plains, their numbers so great they looked like living mosaics upon the seabed. Though each shell was small, together they spread across continents, weaving continuity into the seas. The crinoids, with their stalked crowns, found new shelves and slopes upon which to grow. Meadows once confined to single basins expanded outward, filling shallow waters across the globe. Picture it, long stretches of continental shelf transformed into underwater prairies, their lace-like arms catching food as currents swept through. Between their stems, trilobites grazed, mollusks drifted, and worms burrowed. The meadows became more than local gardens. They became highways for other creatures, corridors of life stretching across oceans. Even the corals joined this quiet migration. Their reefs, small at first, grew larger and spread farther. Colonies seeded by drifting larvae began new structures wherever conditions allowed, dotting coastlines with fortresses of stone and shelter. Over time, these reefs became stepping stones for other creatures, connecting distant ecosystems into a chain of abundance. If you could fly above the Ordovician seas, you would see them like glowing lanterns, scattered across the edges of continents, each one a beacon of life. And above it all, the cephalopods ranged farthest of all. Their ability to regulate buoyancy gave them freedom no trilobite or brachiopod could match. They glided not only along coastlines, but across open waters, drifting into deeper seas, chasing prey in every corner of the ocean. Some grew immense, their shells stretching meters long, and with that size came the ability to travel far and wide. Imagine them as solemn wanderers, lords of the sea, their journeys unbound by shore or reef. They became the first true explorers of the deep, their migrations writing the ocean's first long-distance pathways. But the migrations were not only of individuals, they were of entire ecosystems. When reefs spread, countless creatures spread with them, trilobites sheltering in coral alcoves, mollusks grazing along surfaces, worms burrowing into the cracks. When crinoid meadows expanded, so too did the trilobites that grazed among their stems, the tiny crustaceans that found refuge at their bases, the plankton that their crowns captured. Each migration was not a single act, but a cascade, life following life, each movement pulling others along in its wake. The currents, steady and wide, were the highways of this world. They carried larvae across distances, drifting them like seeds upon the wind. They connected reefs thousands of miles apart, ensuring that no corner of the ocean was isolated. In this way, migration was not only an act of wandering, but of connection, weaving distant seas into a single vast community. Close your eyes and imagine the oceans as they were then. No matter where you descended, whether along the shelves of Laurentia, the shallow bays of Gondwana, or the waters near Baltica, you would find familiar faces: trilobites crawling across sand, brachiopods filtering patiently, crinoids swaying in gardens, cephalopods drifting with solemn grace. The world, once fragmented, was now unified by life. The ocean was no longer a collection of isolated stories, but a single shared tale, a migration not only across space, but across time. There is a coziness to this story of movement, for though the creatures were many and the seas vast, they were bound together by quiet persistence. They did not race, they did not conquer, they simply moved, slowly, steadily, filling every corner of the ocean with their presence. Their migrations were not about leaving home, but about expanding it, about finding new places where life could belong, where seashells could open, where trilobites could scuttle, where coral reefs could rise, and where the song of the ocean could be heard in more and more places. And so, in the Age of Invertebrates, migration was not just an act of survival. It was an act of creation, the creation of a connected ocean, a global web of life, a story woven from countless small journeys. In every drift of plankton, in every wandering trilobite, in every reef that seeded a new coast, life spread farther, and the earth itself grew richer. In every age of Earth's story, there are builders, creatures whose lives shape the landscapes around them, whose quiet persistence leaves behind something greater than themselves. In the Paleozoic seas, the invertebrates were these builders. They were the quiet architects of the ocean, not by design or intent, but simply by being. Their shells, their skeletons, their reefs, and even their discarded remains became the bricks and mortar of the seafloor, laying down the foundations upon which the future would be built. Imagine kneeling upon the seabed and running your hand through the sand. At first it feels like any other sand, fine, shifting, cool beneath your fingers, but look closer and you would see that much of this sand was once alive. Broken fragments of brachiopod shells, tiny discs of crinoid stalks, crumbled bits of coral, all ground by currents into grains, layered upon layers. Every handful is a memory, every grain a remnant of a life once filtering, swaying, drifting. The seafloor itself is a library, written not with ink, but with calcium carbonate, with the quiet contributions of countless invertebrates. The corals in particular were grand architects. Their colonies rose into reefs, structures that outlasted the lives of any single polyp. A single coral, fragile and soft, was insignificant on its own, But together, bound in unity, they built fortresses of stone, walls and towers that stood against the currents and storms. These reefs became the first great architecture of life, not only beautiful, but functional, shaping entire ecosystems around them. Fish had not yet arrived, but trilobites, brachiopods, worms and mollusks all found shelter within coral labyrinths. The reef was not just a home for corals, but for an entire community, an underwater city where the walls were alive. The crinoids too left their mark. Their segmented stalks, when broken, fell to the seabed and piled up in drifts of small discs. Over millions of years, these discs compacted into thick beds of limestone, layers that now rise in cliffs and mountains across our world. To stand before such a cliff today, its surface flecked with tiny circles, is to look upon an ancient meadow turned to stone, a meadow of sea lilies swaying in currents long forgotten, their legacy etched into the earth forever. Even the humble brachiopods played their part. Their shells accumulated in staggering numbers, carpeting seafloors until death piled upon death, creating thick deposits of shell beds. These layers, pressed and hardened by time, became limestone as well. The living turned to rock, the temporary turned to eternal. What seemed small in life became monumental in death, a reminder that persistence, multiplied across millions, can shape continents. The trilobites, though not builders in the same way, were architects of another sort. Their burrows churned the sediments, mixing oxygen into the seafloor, enriching the ground for other lives. Their constant scuttling stirred nutrients, keeping ecosystems vibrant. They were the gardeners of the seabed, shaping its character not with stone, but with motion, leaving behind trails that changed the very soil of the ocean. Picture the long passage of time. A coral reef rises, grows, flourishes, and eventually dies. Its skeletons crumble, but even in crumbling, they become the foundation for a new reef to grow atop. A meadow of crinoids sways for centuries, their stalks breaking and falling, until the seafloor is paved with their remains. A bed of brachiopods filters the water for generations, until at last, their shells pile up into banks that stretch for miles. Each layer of stone is not just rock. It is a record, a fossilized symphony of patient lives building, crumbling, and building again. And as these structures grew, they shaped the oceans themselves. Reefs changed currents, redirecting the flow of water. Shell beds stabilized the seafloor, preventing sands from drifting away. Crinoid meadows filtered nutrients, clearing waters for corals to thrive. The architects were not loud in their work, nor fast, nor purposeful in the way humans build cities, but their impact was greater still, for they shaped not only their homes, but the earth itself. Close your eyes and imagine standing in the middle of a reef, surrounded by walls of coral, brachiopods clustered in alcoves, trilobites scuttling across ledges, cephalopods gliding overhead. Feel the solidity of the reef beneath your feet, the weight of millions of skeletons bound together into stone. It is alive, yes, but also ancient, a monument built not in years, but in ages. This is the cathedral of the invertebrates, not carved by hand, but grown by patience, built by countless small lives, layering one upon another. And in time, when those reefs collapsed, when those shell beds were buried, when those crinoid meadows fell silent, their gifts did not vanish. They became the limestone that would one day rise into mountains, the rocks that would cradle caves, the stones upon which forests and rivers would later rest. Even now, the cliffs that tower above us, the stones that build our cities, the caves we wander in awe, all whisper of these quiet architects, whose patient work made the earth itself. There is something deeply cozy in this thought, that the smallest, humblest lives, by simply living, by simply enduring, could leave behind legacies greater than empires. That every shell, every stalk, every polyp was part of a vast construction project no creature ever planned, but all contributed to. That the earth we know today was built not by sudden forces alone, but by the steady hands of the ocean's quiet architects. The seas of the Ordovician and Silurian were abundant, flourishing with reefs, meadows, and drifting communities. But the story of life is never only about calm. Even in the most patient ages, there are storms. Currents change, climates shift, seas rise and fall. Life, no matter how abundant, is always tested. In the Age of Invertebrates, these tests came often, not as singular catastrophes, but as rhythms of challenge woven into the fabric of time. Imagine the surface of the Paleozoic ocean on a calm day. The sunlight sparkles, waves ripple gently, and all seems eternal. But then clouds gather, winds rise, and the sea begins to churn. Storms in these ancient times were not so different from those we know today. Their force born from wind and water colliding. Waves could rise tall and violent, crashing against the reefs, battering coral colonies, stirring up silt that blanketed the seafloor. What had been a quiet meadow of crinoids could, in a single storm, be bent low or torn away, their stalks ripped from the sand. For the creatures of the reef, these storms were moments of trial. Trilobites scuttled for shelter, pressing themselves into crevices, their armored shells protecting them from the tumbling debris. Brachiopods clamped their valves shut, waiting patiently until the currents calmed. Corals, though broken in places, endured, their colonies designed not for speed, but for resilience, able to regrow even from shattered fragments. After the storm, the seabed often looked changed. Coral skeletons lay toppled, shells scattered, sands rearranged into new patterns, and yet within days life returned. Trilobites emerged from hiding, resuming their endless wanderings. Crinoid stalks began to sprout anew from the rubble. Coral fragments, still alive, anchored themselves and began again the slow work of building. The setback became part of the rhythm, destruction followed by renewal, loss followed by growth. Beyond storms, there were larger shifts. The Earth itself was restless, its continents drifting, colliding, pulling apart. During the Ordovician, sea levels rose, flooding vast stretches of land and creating new shallow seas. Life spread into these new spaces, filling them with reefs and shell beds. Later, sea levels fell again, draining shallow basins, leaving once thriving communities stranded or buried beneath mud. Each change forced invertebrates to adapt, to move, to begin anew. There were changes in climate too. Ice sheets advanced and retreated, drawing water into frozen masses, then releasing it back to the sea. Temperatures cooled, then warmed again, testing the resilience of delicate ecosystems. The Ordovician ended with one of the great extinctions of Earth's history, a sudden cooling that took the lives of countless species. Entire families of trilobites vanished, reefs collapsed, brachiopod beds thinned. It was a reminder that even flourishing ages carry shadows, that abundance can be interrupted in a breath of geologic time. And yet the story does not end with loss, for even as some species perished, others endured. The trilobites, though diminished, survived. The corals, though broken, rebuilt. The brachiopods, though thinned, returned in strength. The crinoids swayed again in new meadows, patient as ever. Life bent but did not break. The ocean, vast and steady, cradled what remained and allowed it to bloom once more. There is something deeply human in this part of the story, though it happened long before us. We too know what it is to face storms, to weather setbacks, to endure seasons of loss. And just as invertebrates clung to stone, shut their shells, or regrew from fragments, we also find ways to continue. The cozy truth hidden in this chapter is that survival is not always about triumph or victory. Sometimes it is about waiting. Sometimes it is about holding on. Sometimes it is simply about enduring until the waters calm again. Close your eyes and imagine standing on the seabed after one of these ancient storms. Around you, the coral city lies in ruin, its towers toppled, its arches collapsed. The sand is scattered, the water murky with silt. And yet here and there life stirs. A trilobite emerges from beneath a rock. A brachiopod slowly parts its valves, tasting the water once more. Tiny coral polyps extend their tentacles, catching the faintest particles. The city is broken, but not silent. It whispers of renewal. It promises that what is lost can, in time, return. The storms and setbacks of the Age of Invertebrates were many, and they would continue through every era of Earth's story. But again and again, life responded not with despair, but with patience. That patience, multiplied across millions of years, carried the story forward. And so, the lesson of this chapter is not one of endings, but of resilience. For even in the fiercest tempests, even in the coldest winters, even in the darkest setbacks, life finds a way to endure. And in that endurance, the story continues. For millions of years, the oceans were the heart of life's story, the only stage where its characters danced and sang. The land, by contrast, stood empty, silent plains of stone and dust, bare mountains rising stark against the sky, rivers flowing without greenery along their banks. It was a quiet, lonely place, untouched by the color and movement that filled the seas. Yet even here, at the edges where waves kissed rock, a new chapter was beginning. Along damp shorelines and tide-washed rocks, tiny spores found their way from sea to land. Carried by wind, swept by currents, or simply drifting with chance, these spores belonged to fungi, some of Earth's first pioneers of the dry world. They were small, unassuming, invisible to the casual eye, yet in their persistence, they began to soften the silence of land. Picture yourself standing at the edge of an Ordovician coast. The waves roll in, pulling back to reveal slick stones glistening in the sun. Between the cracks and crevices, you notice faint films, dark threads spreading slowly, almost imperceptibly, across the rock. These are fungi, quiet settlers, weaving their hyphae into the stone, breaking it down grain by grain. Their work is invisible at the moment, but over centuries, they transform bare rock into soil, preparing a foundation for life yet to come. The fungi did not walk, nor swim, nor build great reefs. Their architecture was more subtle. They grew in threads finer than hair, creeping into cracks, secreting acids that dissolved minerals, extracting nutrients from the stone. Piece by piece, they unlocked what was hidden, turning solid rock into something softer, something that could cradle life. They were the alchemists of the land, changing what seemed eternal into something fertile. And in their quiet work, they partnered with others. Cyanobacteria and algae sometimes joined them, forming lichen-like partnerships. Together, they clung to bare surfaces, enduring wind, rain, and sun. To human eyes, they might have seemed insignificant smudges of green or black on stone, but to Earth's story, they were a revolution. For where they grew, they began to trap dust, to hold water, to create the faintest beginnings of soil. Close your eyes and imagine kneeling at this land's edge. The ground beneath your hands feels rough, unyielding, but look closer and you would see the first threads of life, filaments weaving invisibly into cracks. The air smells faintly of wet stone, sharp and clean, and above, the sky stretches unbroken, silent without the songs of birds or the rustle of leaves. It is a land in waiting, but already the fungi are writing its prologue. Their presence was humble, but their impact was profound. Without fungi breaking down rock, the soil necessary for plants could never have formed. Without soil, the land could never have hosted greenery, never offered sustenance to creatures that would one day crawl from the sea. In this way, the fungi were pathfinders, not the stars of the show, but the ones who prepared the stage, sweeping and softening it for those yet to arrive. The cozy truth of this story lies in its patience. The fungi did not rush. They spread slowly, thread by thread, year by year, their work measured not in moments, but in ages. They remind us that great transformations often begin in silence, with humble beginnings that seem small at the time, but ripple outward into eternity. And so at the land's edge, the first whispers of a new world began. While the seas continued to flourish with trilobites, corals, and cephalopods, the land, once barren, was being prepared, quietly, invisibly, by the fungi and their companions. It was the first step toward a green earth, toward forests and meadows, toward a future where life would not be confined to the waves. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the gentle rustle of spores drifting in the wind, the soft scraping of fungi upon stone, the promise of roots yet to come. The age of invertebrates still belonged to the seas, but at the edges, at the margins, the land was awakening, its silence slowly giving way to life. The land had waited patiently for eons, its stones bare, its mountains stark, its rivers running silently across lifeless plains. But with fungi weaving their invisible threads across the rocks, and with soil beginning to gather in cracks and low places, the silence was ready to be broken. Out of the damp shallows, carried by tides and winds, came the first pioneers of greenery, the earliest land plants, small and fragile, but destined to change Earth forever. Imagine a coastline in the middle Paleozoic. The sea rolls in and retreats, leaving behind slick stone and shallow pools that glisten under the sun. At first glance, it is still a barren place, the air empty of birds, the ground empty of grass. But if you look more closely, if you kneel down and let your eyes adjust to the subtle, you will see it, faint patches of green clinging to damp stone. Moss-like mats, thin as a breath, spread across the rocks. Tiny filaments reach out from the edges, anchoring themselves into cracks softened by fungi. They are small, no taller than a finger, but they are alive, the first green brushstrokes upon a gray canvas. These early plants had no stems, no leaves, no roots in the way we know them today. They were simple, more like liverworts and mosses than trees or flowers. Their bodies absorbed water directly from the air and ground, and so they clung to moist places, along rivers, in tidal pools, in the damp mist of rain-soaked stone. Where dryness crept in, they withered, but where dampness lingered, they thrived, spreading outward in quiet carpets of green. Close your eyes and imagine standing upon such a shore. Around you stretches stone, rough and uneven, yet here and there the grey is softened with green, not lush forests, not rolling meadows, but small patches, like soft cloth laid gently across the rock. The air smells faintly different here, touched by the breath of greenery, subtle but new. It is not yet the oxygen-rich air of future forests, but it carries a hint of change, a whisper of what is to come. These small plants did more than simply survive. They began to reshape the land itself. Their filaments held soil in place, preventing it from washing away with the rains. Their presence trapped moisture, creating microhabitats where other tiny lives, fungi, microbes, even small invertebrates venturing close to shore, could find shelter. They were like living blankets, softening the harshness of stone, turning lifeless edges into gentle places of promise. And as they grew, they gave a gift to the air. Like the algae of the seas, these early plants captured sunlight and released oxygen. At first, the contribution was small, barely a trace in the vastness of the atmosphere, but even the faintest breath mattered. Slowly, silently, these whispers of oxygen began to build, paving the way for the rich air that would one day support forests, animals, and eventually human breath. There is a coziness in imagining this first greenery. Picture walking barefoot across stone warmed by the sun, your steps falling upon patches of damp moss. The softness surprises you, cushioning your stride, cool beneath your toes. Around you, the stone is still harsh and dry, but the green spreads outward, patch by patch, offering comfort to the eye and rest to the spirit. It feels like hope made visible, like a gentle promise that the land, once silent, will not remain so forever. The plants were fragile, yes. Drought could kill them, heat could wither them, storms could wash them away, but they returned again and again, from spores carried on the wind, from mats regrowing in sheltered crevices. Their fragility was matched by resilience, their smallness by persistence. They did not conquer the land in a rush, but in a whisper, a slow spreading of green across centuries and ages. If you linger on this shore long enough, not for hours, but for millennia in the imagination, you would see the green grow bolder. Mosses thicken, liverwort like mats spreading farther inland. The land's edges slowly softening, its silence slowly filling. What begins as a whisper will, in time, become a chorus and one day a forest. But here, in the age of invertebrates, it is only a beginning, a gentle first step toward a new world. And so, the story of plants begins not with grandeur, but with humility. Not with towering trees or sweeping canopies, but with small, damp mats of green clinging stubbornly to stone. Their presence was a quiet revolution, turning the barren into the fertile, the silent into the living. They remind us that change often begins in whispers, and that the smallest beginnings can grow into the most enduring legacies. The Age of Invertebrates was never a simple tale of abundance. It was a story of persistence, of creatures small and humble enduring through shifting seas, rising storms, and sweeping changes. It was a story written not in moments of triumph, but in echoes that carried across ages, echoes of resilience, soft yet enduring, like the murmur of waves upon a shore that never truly falls silent. Imagine standing at the edge of a Paleozoic reef after centuries of growth. Around you, corals rise in towers, brachiopods open and close in steady rhythm, trilobites scuttle endlessly across the sand, and cephalopods drift with quiet authority. It feels eternal, as though this world of abundance will last forever. But time in the ocean is never still. The earth shifts, ice advances, currents change, and with each shift comes loss, not the end of all, but the thinning of some, the fatting of others. Yet always something remains. When storms tear through reefs, new polyps anchor themselves and begin again. When trilobite families vanish, others persist, scuttling onward into the next age. When ice grips the world and temperatures fall, brachiopods cling to life in sheltered bays, waiting patiently for warmth to return. Even in extinction, life bends but does not break. Its song grows quieter, but never silent, carrying forward into the next verse. There is comfort in this rhythm. The creatures of the Paleozoic were not invincible. They suffered losses, faced predators, endured upheavals, but their resilience lay not in perfection, but in persistence. They adapted, they shifted, they found new niches, new ways of being. Each challenge was met not with despair, but with patience. This patience, stretched across millions of years, became their greatest strength. The trilobites remind us of this most clearly. Though waves of extinction swept across them again and again, they endured for nearly 300 million years. Whole continents drifted, climates shifted, yet still they crawled, their shells pressed against the sand, their eyes scanning the twilight waters. They were not the largest nor the fiercest, but they were steady. Their endurance was their victory. The brachiopods, too, echo with resilience. Their shells, layered upon shells, filled the seas long after storms and shifts had thinned their numbers. Even now, some still live in our oceans, quiet survivors of an age-long past. To look upon one today is to see a living whisper from 500 million years ago, a reminder that what endures need not be loud. The crinoids swaying in their meadows also endured. Though storms tore them down, though predators nibbled at their crowns, they grew back again and again. Their fragments became stone, but their meadows always returned, swaying once more with the rhythm of the current. They remind us that beauty, though fragile, can be stubborn in its persistence. Even the cephalopods, hunters, explorers, lords of the sea, carried their resilience forward. When climates changed, they adjusted their shells, their habits, their reach. From those early straight-shelled nautiloids came the ancestors of squids and octopuses, creatures still with us today. Their intelligence, their adaptability, their grace, all are echoes of resilience passed down from an age when the seas first filled with giants. And on the land, the whispers of resilience were just beginning. Fungi clung to stone, softening it into soil. Moss-like plants spread across damp rocks, inching forward despite drought, despite heat, despite wind. Their smallness was their strength. They asked little, needed little, and yet gave much, preparing the way for forests yet to come. Close your eyes and listen to this ocean world. Beneath the crashing of waves and the hum of storms, you can hear it, the steady, patient beat of resilience. The trilobites' legs are scuttling across sand. The brachiopods' valves open and close. The corals' polyps feed in silence. The crinoids' crowns swaying. Each sound small on its own, but together forming a rhythm that carried across millions of years. There is a cozy reassurance in this. For though ages end, though species fade, the story continues. Life does not give up easily. It endures in small ways, in quiet corners, in patient gestures, and those small acts, multiplied across time, become legacies. The limestone cliffs that rise above our rivers, the fossils pressed into our hills, the seashells found in children's hands, all are echoes of the resilience born in this age. The Age of Invertebrates reminds us that strength is not always in size or speed or force. Sometimes it is in patience, in adaptability, in the willingness to bend without breaking. The trilobite that curls into a ball, the brachiopod that waits with a closed shell, the coral fragment that anchors again, the moss patch that clings to stone. Each is a small act of endurance, and together they shape worlds. And so, as the Paleozoic continued, storms came and went, extinctions thinned the seas, continents drifted and collided. Yet the echoes of resilience remained, humming softly beneath it all. They remind us still, across 500 million years, that life does not surrender easily. It adapts, it endures, it whispers forward into the future. The ocean is not only a home, it is also a canvas. And in the Paleozoic, the invertebrates became its artists and architects, leaving behind structures so vast and enduring that they still shape the face of our planet today. Their shells, their skeletons, their reefs, and their meadows did not vanish when they died. Instead, they built stone by stone, layer by layer, until the seas themselves carried the weight of their patience in towering monuments of limestone and coral. Imagine kneeling on a shallow seabed during the Silurian. Around you, corals rise like walls, their branches twisting upward toward the light. Crinoids sway in dense meadows, their stalks bending with the current. Brachiopods cluster in carpets across the sand, their shells glinting as they open and close. Each creature seems small, each life fragile, and yet together they are building something immense, something that will outlast them all. The corals are the most visible of these architects. Their colonies, tiny polyps no larger than a grain of rice, secrete skeletons of calcium carbonate. One polyp lives, grows, dies, and another builds upon its foundation. Over centuries, the colony becomes a mound. Over millennia, the mound becomes a reef. And over millions of years, reefs rise into fortresses, stretching for miles along coastlines, sculpting entire continents. The reef is alive, yes, but it is also stone, a monument made not by hands, but by patience. The crinoids join in this quiet work. Their stalks, when broken, fall to the seafloor. Their crowns, when spent, drift down and settle. Over time, the seafloor is blanketed in their fragments, white discs upon white discs, piling into thick beds of debris. Layer after layer compresses, and in time those beds harden into limestone. Even today, cliffs across the world bear their marks, circles like beads pressed into stone, each one a memory of a sea lily that swayed in currents 500 million years ago. Brachiopods, too, contribute their share. Their shells fall in vast numbers, carpeting the seabed until entire landscapes are made of them. Their remains, compacted by time, become rock as well, forming layers so thick they now rise into mountains. To stand upon such a mountain in our own age, to see brachiopod fossils scattered across its surface, is to stand upon the ruins of an ancient seabed, raised skyward by the slow hands of plate tectonics. Even the trilobites, though less often preserved in great numbers, left their mark. Their molted shells littered the sands, layer upon layer, while their burrowing stirred and oxygenated sediments, helping to create fertile grounds where other lives could flourish. Their contributions were not only in stone, but in the very soil of the sea, shaping the ecosystem's balance for millions of years. Close your eyes and picture the long arc of this creation. A reef rises, grows, and falls. Its fragments scatter, settle, and harden into limestone. A meadow of crinoids sways, their bodies eventually blanketing the seafloor in discs that in time become cliffs. Brachiopod beds spread outward, their shells stacking into layers that stretch across continents. What seems fragile in the moment, a single shell, a single stalk, a single polyp, becomes eternal when multiplied by millions. This was the art of the invertebrates, to turn the temporary into the lasting, the delicate into the monumental. And in building stone, they reshaped the very oceans around them. Reefs redirected currents, creating sheltered lagoons and rich shallows. Limestone deposits altered coastlines, building platforms upon which new life could grow. The architects of stone were not only preserving their memory, but also preparing the stage for what was yet to come. The ecosystems of fish, of plants, of amphibians, of forests, and beyond, all would be built upon the foundations laid by these quiet invertebrates. There is something deeply cozy in this realization, to know that cliffs we walk beside today, caves we explore, stones we build our homes upon, are all gifts from creatures that lived in silence 500 million years ago. They did not plan, they did not design, they simply lived, filtering, swaying, building, drifting. Yet in their persistence, they wrote themselves into the bones of the earth. The Age of Invertebrates was not only an age of life, it was an age of architecture, of construction, of patient monuments. The seas were not only filled with movement and song, but with the steady building of stone that would rise into mountains, crumble into soils, and cradle the forests and rivers of ages yet to come. And so the quiet architects remind us that even the smallest lives, through patience and persistence, can leave legacies greater than empires. Their cathedrals of coral, their meadows turned to limestone, their shells pressed into cliffs, all are whispers of a time when life first learned not only to endure, but to build. For eons, the seas had been the heart of life, vast, protective, nourishing. But at the boundary where water met stone, something stirred. The shoreline was neither fully ocean nor fully land. It was a place in between, where waves rose and fell in endless rhythm, leaving pools that shimmered in the sun and damp stretches of sand that glistened with promise. It was here, in this liminal space, that invertebrates began to linger, not to conquer the land just yet, but to explore it, to touch its edges with curiosity. Imagine walking along such a shoreline in the Silurian or early Devonian. The air is clear, thinner than ours, and the wind carries only the scent of salt and wet stone. Before you, waves break and retreat, leaving behind shallow pools warmed by the sun. Within these pools, life gathers, trilobites scuttling across the sand, small mollusks grazing on algae, worms winding through the silt. Each pool is like a miniature ocean, cut off for a time from the greater sea, a cradle where life learns to endure in smaller, harsher spaces. For many invertebrates, these tidal pools were both sanctuary and challenge. Food was abundant, algae spread across damp rocks, plankton collected in trapped waters, detritus settled thickly at the bottom. But with each ebb of the tide came risk. Water grew warmer, saltier, and sometimes scarce. Those that survived were the ones who could wait, who could close their shells against the drying air, who could burrow deep enough to hold onto moisture until the sea returned. Brachiopods clamped themselves tightly shut, surviving the hours of exposure. Small arthropods wriggled into cracks, sheltered beneath stones. Some early relatives of scorpions and millipedes, drawn by curiosity or necessity, began to crawl across damp sands, their legs carrying them where fins and shells could not. They did not stay long. The land was still a dangerous place, dry and unforgiving, but each excursion was a whisper of the future, a soft rehearsal for what was to come. Close your eyes and imagine kneeling beside a pool, the rock warm beneath your hands. Within, trilobites shuffle quietly, their bodies leaving trails in the fine silt. Tiny crustaceans flick their limbs, darting from shadow to light. Algae spreads in delicate films along the stone, its green vivid against the gray. You can almost hear the soft hum of life here, different from the vastness of the open sea, more intimate, more fragile, yet no less vital. It is as though the shoreline itself has become a small, cozy chamber, a place where life whispers secrets to itself before returning to the ocean's embrace. Curiosity of invertebrates did not stop at the pools. Some began to wander across damp mudflats left behind by retreating tides. Their tracks pressed into the soft ground, fleeting footprints that told of exploration. Fossils of such trails still exist today, faint impressions of trilobite legs, of small arthropod feet, marking journeys across land 500 million years ago. They are not grand voyages, but gentle steps, the kind a child might take when testing unfamiliar ground. Each track is a memory of curiosity made visible, a trace of life daring to wonder what lay beyond the sea. The shore itself changed in response. Algae and fungi, already softening the stone, spread farther across wet surfaces, providing both food and shade. Small mats of moss-like plants thickened in damp hollows, offering the first true greenery for wandering creatures to touch. The land, though still barren, was no longer silent. It hummed faintly now, touched by the movements of life that had begun to stray from the waves. There is a coziness in imagining these early explorers. They did not march boldly, nor did they seek conquest. They crept, they scuttled, they lingered, testing, retreating, returning. Their courage was quiet, measured in inches, not miles. And yet, in those inches lay the beginnings of a revolution. For the Age of Invertebrates was not only about abundance in the sea, it was also about possibility at the shore. The trilobite that scuttled across wet stone, the mollusk that held tightly until the tide returned, the arthropod that wandered briefly onto land, all were part of the same whisper, a suggestion that life could belong here too, upon the rocks and sands beneath the open sky. And so the shoreline became more than a boundary. It became a threshold, a place of curiosity, of first steps, of gentle testing. Here, in the cozy pools and damp sands of the Paleozoic, life leaned forward into the unknown, preparing for a future where oceans would no longer be the only stage. The Age of Invertebrates was more than a chapter of shells and reefs, more than trilobites and corals, more than cephalopods drifting through endless blue. It was a foundation, a deep and steady current upon which the whole future of life would rest. Though the invertebrates did not stride onto land as conquerors, though they never built forests or roamed across plains, their legacy was profound. They created the stage, laid the groundwork, wrote the quiet prelude to the symphony of life that would follow. Imagine standing at the edge of a Paleozoic reef, sunlight streaming down through clear water. Before you stretch towers of coral, meadows of crinoids, carpets of brachiopods, and scuttling lines of trilobites. Cephalopods glide above, their tentacles trailing, their eyes gleaming with intelligence. Around you, the water is alive with plankton, invisible yet essential, drifting in countless clouds. It is a world humming with abundance, a harmony of many voices, each small on its own, but together forming a chorus that fills the sea. That chorus, sung by invertebrates, shaped more than their own age. The reefs they built became havens, supporting communities that grew in complexity and richness. The shells they left behind became limestone, layering into cliffs and mountains that still rise in our own time. The meadows of crinoids, the beds of brachiopods, the trails of trilobites, all of them became stone, memory pressed into the bones of the earth itself. Their legacy is not only in fossils, but in the very landscapes we walk upon. The oxygen they gave, the nutrients they cycled, the balance they created, all of these laid the groundwork for the future. Without plankton feeding the waters, without reefs creating sanctuaries, without shells building soil and stone, the land could not have been prepared for greenery, and the seas could not have supported the fish and amphibians soon to come. Every breath, every forest, every creature that followed carries, in some quiet way, the imprint of this age. Even their resilience became a legacy. They endured storms, extinctions, and shifting climates, proving that life could not only flourish but persist. Their patience, their ability to adapt, their quiet endurance became part of the ocean's memory, a pattern woven into the DNA of all creatures yet to come. Close your eyes and listen. Beneath the rush of waves, you can still hear it, the soft scuttle of trilobites across sand, the faint opening and closing of brachiopod shells, the whisper of coral polyps feeding, the slow sway of crinoid crowns in the current. These sounds are echoes now long vanished, yet they linger in stone, in water, in the air we breathe. They are the heartbeat of the ocean, carried forward into every age. There is something deeply cozy in this reflection, for though the invertebrates were small, though their lives were humble, they remind us that greatness often begins in quiet places. They did not roar, they did not dominate, they did not stride boldly across the land, but in their patience, they created the conditions for everything else. Their legacy is not one of conquest, but of foundation, not of endings, but of beginnings. When we hold a trilobite fossil in our hand, when we walk beside a limestone cliff flecked with shells, when we gaze into the stillness of a tidal pool, we are touching this legacy. We are reminded that life's story is not written only in the bold chapters, but also in the soft ones, in the steady persistence of small creatures who built worlds with their patience. The age of invertebrates is gone, its seas long vanished, its reefs turned to stone. And yet, in a very real way, it is still with us. Its cathedrals of coral became our mountains, its meadows of crinoids became our cliffs, its quiet endurance became our breath. The ocean's legacy lives in every green leaf, every soaring bird, every living thing that came after. And so, as the age of invertebrates draws to its close, we look forward to what is to come, fish filling the seas, plants greening the land, amphibians testing their steps upon the shore. But even as new stories unfold, we remember this one. We remember the trilobites, the brachiopods, the corals, the cephalopods, the crinoids. We remember the ocean's patient architects, its quiet gardeners, its drifting lanterns of life. For their legacy is not only behind us, pressed into stone. It is beneath our feet, in the rocks of our world, in the rhythms of our seas, in the persistence of life itself. The ocean's legacy is our legacy, soft, enduring, eternal. The age of invertebrates began with whispers and ended with echoes, but its legacy was never silence. It was an age of patience, of shells and reefs, of meadows swaying beneath the sea. For nearly 100 million years, the oceans hummed with their abundance, every tide carrying forward the rhythm of trilobites, brachiopods, corals, crinoids, and cephalopods. They were the first great tapestry, weaving the ocean into a harmony of balance, beauty, and resilience. Close your eyes and picture the final scene of this age. The sun sets upon a Silurian reef, its light scattering into golden threads across the surface of the sea. Beneath, corals glow softly in the fading beams, their polyps swaying like lanterns in the twilight. Trilobites scuttle across the sand, their shells glinting with the last kiss of daylight. Cephalopods drift in silence, their tentacles curling gently as they descend into the deep. Crinoid meadows bend with the currents, their crowns catching one final shimmer of light. It is not an ending of loss, but of quiet closure, an age bowing gracefully, making way for what will follow. What the invertebrates gave cannot be measured in numbers alone. They built reefs that turned into mountains, shells that became cliffs, meadows that hardened into stone. They gave oxygen, they cycled nutrients, they stabilized ecosystems. More than this, they showed that life could not only survive but flourish, filling every niche, every tide, every current with creativity. Their patience, multiplied across millions of years, shaped the very Earth we know today. Their story, cozy in its constancy, is a reminder that greatness is often quiet, that the smallest lives, through persistence, can build legacies larger than empires. The soft scuttle of trilobite legs, the steady filtering of brachiopod shells, the delicate sway of crinoid crowns, these simple rhythms, repeated endlessly, can shape oceans and continents. And so, as the Age of Invertebrates draws its curtain, the stage is ready for new actors. Fish will soon rise in numbers and variety, their fins slicing through waters once ruled by trilobites. Plants will spread farther inland, greening the once barren land. Amphibians will step hesitantly from sea to shore, their lungs filled with the breath first gifted by algae and plants. The story will grow louder, grander, more complex, but it will always rest upon the quiet foundation of invertebrates. When we hold a trilobite fossil, when we walk beside limestone cliffs, when we breathe the air enriched by ancient greenery, we are connected to this age. It lives on in stone, in air, in the very rhythm of life itself. The Age of Invertebrates is not gone. It is within us, beneath us, around us. Its gentle echoes still hum in every tide and every current. And so we close this chapter with gratitude for the trilobites who scuttled patiently, for the corals who built tirelessly, for the crinoids who swayed gracefully, for the cephalopods who drifted elegantly. They remind us that endurance is beauty, that patience is strength, that the quietest lives can build the loudest legacies. The curtain falls softly here, but the story continues. Ahead waits the age of fish, the greening of the land, the rise of amphibians, new voices joining the song. Yet always, beneath it all, the echoes of the invertebrates remain, humming gently, eternally in the deep.